Now when you look at my calendar, my morning walk is there. It's on my calendar. My morning meditation's on my calendar. My afternoon meditation's on my calendar. So I tell my clients, make these things calendar events. If you want to go to the gym.
I realize that the English language puts a lot of limitations on us through speech.
Yeah.
So I would be very happy to come out of my comfort zone to learn another language if it is of high vibration.
Yeah. We've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten why we're here. We've forgotten where we're going. We're just walking through life. We are being fed if you want to be happier, just get more stuff. Just spend more money, make more money, just work harder, and then you'll be happier. We're taught boys don't cry. Boys don't feel sadness. Boys don't whatever. And so what happens to a lot of men, we suppress our emotions to the point where we don't even know we're having emotions.
If you are new to this podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share, because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. If you would like to support this podcast, please check out our merch store on Amazon with the brand Todd and Me. We've got some cool t-shirts, tank tops, hoodies, and sweaters. Link will be in the description of this podcast. And if you're now starting a spiritual journey, you would like to start a spiritual journey, or you're currently on a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, please hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246, and it will help you to get some magic mushrooms. Enjoy the show and stay tuned, because we have some more great content coming soon. Hello friends, and welcome back to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. I am your host Todd Cave, and today we welcome first time guest Brian Smith, and he is the author of the book Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, How to Survive and Thrive After Life's Greatest Challenges. And he's going to talk to us about how to not only overcome grief, but also to grow from it. Brian is a grief guide, personal transformation facilitator, and mental fitness trainer. His mission is to help people rediscover who they are and why they are here. Brian says that in those two questions lie the secrets to not only surviving this life, but also thriving. Brian says that if you're feeling stuck, it's most likely because you have forgotten the answer to one or both of these questions. His vision is to create a world where everyone has a sense of purpose and fulfillment. If we know the why, we can endure any how. He wants to remind everyone of their true nature and their reason for being. Now, this was an awesome conversation with Brian, and we not only touched on grief, but we also spoke about what's going on in the world, a little bit of geopolitics, and the social dynamics between men and women, because it is clear that social media has changed the landscape of dating and also the interactions between men and women in general. And we touch on some of these topics because, not only is overcoming grief important, but when we overcome grief, the skills that we attain from overcoming grief will help us to overcome any challenges that we have. And we all have grief at some point in our lives, whether it is a grief of a loved one passing, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, going bankrupt, losing money, etc., etc. And in this conversation, we try to tackle all of these things and give you all the tools on how you can overcome any situation that comes in your way in life.
When truth is blurred by lies and misinformation, perception becomes reality. What will you perceive your reality to be?
Liberate your fears and walk with me.
Sit down and meditate. Connect with your soul.
Be a monster and then learn how to control it.
You got to be willing to do the work.
So it really goes really deep in terms of words and etymology and what they mean. So this is why it is really hard to really crack the matrix, because there's so many levels and layers to it, Brian, I'm honored to speak to you today. So a warm welcome to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Ty. Thanks for having me here.
Yes, I'm really, really excited to talk to you because, I never really thought of grief as an area that I would want to talk about. But after, reading some information about you, I thought it was actually quite interesting because we all will go through some degree of grief in our lifetime, whether that is grief from a failed relationship, grief from a death of a loved one, a loss of job, loss of money, bankruptcy. There's grief at some point in our entire life, and I think that with the way that things are going right now, I think that this is a very pertinent conversation because in general we have a lot of grief on the planet in general because things have only gotten worse since the pandemic, and there seems to be a systematic approach by a hidden hand to make more strife, which will obviously bring some element of grief. So, for that reason, I'm really interested to talk to you to find out more about this interesting subject. So, can you please tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, where they can find you, and how you became a grief coach, a grief guide, personal transformation facilitator, and mental fitness trainer?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as you said, my name is Brian Smith. My business, my book, my website is all grief2growth.com. So it's grief, the numeral 2, growth. What led me to this work is, as you said earlier, grief is one of those things that nobody wants to talk about, but it's one of the things in life that's universal. If you're on this planet long enough, you're going to go through some sort of loss. So for me, I came to the planet in the early 1960s. I was a black kid growing up in the United States during a time of, a lot of racial strife during the time of the Vietnam War. I looked around the planet and I was like, this place is crazy. I don't really get it. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Then I was raised in a very fundamentalist Christian home, and I was taught about this God that was extremely judgmental, seemed to be mad at everybody. And if you did anything wrong, he was going to send you to hell for eternity. So that freaked me out, caused me to have all kinds of issues with anxiety, issues with depression as a child. So I spent my life next 20, 30 years exploring, like figuring out what is going on. Why is the world so crazy? Why do I feel like I don't really fit in? What is this thing that's called death that we all have to go through? And why do people die? And why is God so angry, as I said earlier? So I thought I had a pretty good handle on that until about 10 years ago. And my daughter, if you're watching, you can see behind me, her name is Shayna. She was 15 years old and she passed away suddenly in June of 2015. So when that happened, I was like, okay, I thought I had a pretty good handle on things, but now I've got to deal with this real grief, right? The loss of a daughter, the loss of a child. So I started doubling down and really digging into, things about the afterlife, things about how do we overcome grief? Can we overcome grief, et cetera? And then about 4 or 5 years ago, after doing, another 4 or 5 years of that deep exploration, said, I want to help other people that are going through this because, again, as I said, this is a universal experience, whether it's a loss of a child, a spouse, a parent, a job, a relationship, a dog, a pet. All these things are things that we're all going to have to go through. And what I've learned during my exploration since that time is grief is not something that we just have to endure, that we need to try to, get over. It's not a disease. It can actually be an opportunity for us to grow, to become stronger, to become more conscious. So that's the message I try to bring to people.
So, okay, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your daughter, firstly. And what really, was the catalyst? Like, there had to have been something that just pushed you to delve into this information and to understand, because there are a lot of people that would lose loved ones and they don't delve into the information like you've did. So, like, what moment or moments led you or pushed you to say, okay, I'm going to try to figure this out? Because clearly this is not something that the average person would do, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to understand that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it just goes back to my nature. Again, when I was a kid, I asked all those questions that most people don't. They just accept that the planet is the way it is, and that's just, that's the way it is. Shayna is kind of like I am. Shayna would always ask me questions. Why? Why, Daddy? Why? Why is the sky blue? Why? Well, just like to infinity, just why? And that's how I was. I would take things apart when I was a kid. I would literally, like, how does this radio work? So I'd take it apart and see what was inside of it. So I think that was a big part of it. But when my daughter passed, really, frankly, I didn't want to be on the planet anymore. I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to live without her. I didn't see the point. I knew I thought I would never be happy again. But I specifically remembered a moment. I went to a grief meeting. It was a group, and there was a woman there, and her daughter had passed away, I think like 10 years before. And this woman was miserable. She was just as angry and depressed, I think, as she was the day her daughter passed. And I thought, I can't be that. Even though I wanted to be that, I'd actually made a vow that's who I was going to be. I was like, that's not fair to my family. It's not fair. I have another daughter. I have a wife. I have family. And I knew my daughter, Shayna, wouldn't want that for me. So I made a decision then, if I'm going to be here, and I guess I'm going to be here, I can't live this way. I've got to figure this out. So it is a choice that we can all make consciously. Some people choose to make it, and some people don't. When I say grief can be a growth opportunity, I mean that literally. It can be, but it's a choice. We can choose to wallow in it. We can choose to hold on to anger or bitterness, and no one's going to take that away from us if that's what we want. But again, I just knew that wasn't for me.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that makes sense because if you're a very inquisitive person, a person that asks why, then even feeling grief from the loss of your daughter, you can be asking why, and then because I used to be a civil engineer, and there's something called root cause analysis, and one of the things that we would do, we ask 5 whys. So I was actually trained to actually like get 2 root causes. And I kind of like apply that into my life for certain things. And then when you get to the actual root cause, it means you're able to get massive level ups in your life or your business or your career, because all the other things come as a consequence of the thing that is the root cause. So I find it kind of fascinating that, like, that methodology or something similar is what led you to doing what you're doing. So I was reading some stuff about you, and I'm kind of intrigued. So I know that grief is something that can come very unexpectedly, whether it is a loss of a loved one or a breakdown in a relationship. So tell us how you define grief and what we should expect from it.
Wow. So grief, I've come to the conclusion, it is when the reality that you're living in doesn't line up with either what you wish for or what you expected. So again, when we think about grief, we often think about the loss of a loved one or a person, and that is the most intense form of grief, probably. That's arguable. But it could be anything, whether it's a job or a relationship, and all the things we talked about before. So that's I think how what grief is in itself. And then again, we have an opportunity. What are we gonna do with this? And what to expect when you're in grief is, I hate to say it, sounds so cliche, but expect the unexpected. We think we know grief is. You've all heard about the 5 stages of grief, which is a misnomer. It's not true. It was never meant to be the 5 stages of grief. It was actually the 5 stages of death and dying. But grief doesn't come in any particular order. The emotions can be those 5 things, but they can also be things like numbness. They can be shock. They can be depression. They can be relief. We can have all kinds of emotions that are associated with the grief event. And so sometimes people will think like they're going crazy. For example, they may say, I just don't feel anything. I feel numb. Maybe I think my emotions are broken. And sometimes when we have an overload, it can actually cause our brain to kind of short circuit and shut that down. Some people experience the fact that they want to sleep all the time. Some people can't sleep at all. Some people start to overeat. Some people don't eat at all. So it affects everybody differently. So we have to understand that it's not something that we can predict. I try to encourage people to know what you're feeling is normal, whatever it is you're feeling, and we have to address the emotions and to turn into them and face them, I believe. But what you can expect if you do the work, and it is work, is that grief can be, again, it can be an opportunity to grow, and it's not always going to be the same. It's not always going to be that searing, hot, burning pain that it is at the beginning. And I believe that there's a debate about whether or not, it gets less over time. I don't believe it does. I believe what happens is we actually get stronger and we can actually carry the grief in a better way. So relatively speaking, it feels like less, but it's because that we have changed as a person and we can carry that grief more easily.
That's quite interesting. I guess it is a matter of time. So it's only a matter of time then that allows you, or maybe in the case with that lady, because she had 10 years and she didn't really get stronger. So I guess what I was about to say may not even be applicable to everyone. So, okay, tell us then, can you give us some practical methods on how to cope with grief?
Yeah, well, and I like what you said about time, because I think it's really interesting. There is that adage that time heals all wounds, which is maybe true with the body, but it's not true with grief. And what I say is it takes time to heal your grief. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to heal it. And that woman was a great example. And I've seen other examples of people, for whatever reason, choose to hold on to their grief. If you do choose to move through it, there are 4 steps or 4 things that I do as daily practices, and I recommend for all my clients, and I recommend actually for everybody. And there's an acronym I have. It's called GEMS, GEMS. So the first thing is practicing gratitude, and we can talk more about what that means. When I first heard it, I would always shake my head. I'm like, this is crazy. But I can tell you, after years of doing it, it actually really works. And it's a way of rewiring our brain. So what I do when I wake up in the morning as one of my exercises, first thing I do before I get out of bed, I think of 3 things that I'm grateful for. And it might be that it's warm, because my bed, I live in a cold climate right now. And it might be that I have heat in my house. It may be that I'm going to have dinner with friends tonight. It could be something very small. But it's, again, a way of looking at what's right rather than what's wrong. And then I think that moving our bodies is really important. Our brains and our bodies, our minds, our spirit, they're all interconnected. And so for me, it looks like I take a walk for 6 miles every morning. So I get up, the first thing I do is I walk it takes me about an hour and 45 minutes. And I'll listen to a podcast, or I'll listen to music or something while I'm doing that. And that's the way I start my day off. And then meditation or mindfulness. So I have a formal meditation practice. I practice twice a day, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon. That helps with that mental fitness to maintain the mindset that we want to have. And then the other thing I say to people is, it's really good to have good sleep. It's really important to have good sleep habits, because, again, our mind-brain connection, we need rest. So I encourage people to try to get to bed around the same time every night. Basically, practice good sleep hygiene to get that rest that we need. So when I talk about grief, and I tell people, it's work. It's a practice. It's called practice for a reason. Something like every day we get up in the morning, we brush our teeth, we wash our face, we take a shower. It's the same thing when it comes to your mental fitness. There's certain things that you need to do to keep yourself mentally and spiritually fit.
Right. So basically, that's very good that you look at everything from a holistic point of view, because that is basically how I coach my clients as well. Because, as everyone knows, I'm a online fitness trainer, and I am very, very big on mindset and also creating habits. So when you said that, because basically what you described is what your daily habits are. You would get up in the morning and you would go and walk. Then you would practice mindfulness meditation twice a day, and you would practice gratitude. And I do have like a similar routine, and I teach this to my clients as well, because I tell people that getting into shape is easy, but not easy. It is easy to do physically, but what makes it difficult to do is having the poor mindset. So you can give someone the best plan, you can give them all the information that they need to be successful, but if they have poor mindset, they're not going to follow a meal plan. They will not have consistency in actually going and exercise. They will not have consistency in terms of doing things like not drinking, and this is why I am a very big supporter of meditation to help in terms of getting into shape, because the way you think about yourself creates how you feel, and how you feel is how you show up in the world. And then the world responds to you according to how you show up. So while you may not be a fitness trainer like me, the same formula that you use with overcoming grief is what I use to coach my clients, which is, it just goes to show that, this information is applicable for all parts of life, really. It's almost like I guess you can call it a curriculum for living.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely a curriculum. And it's you have to make it a priority, and it's funny because when I'm working with clients, I always, when I check in, I'm like, well, what have you done this week? Have you practiced this week? And my daughter is a mental health counselor, and we talk about this. You can't just go see a physical coach or a mental coach and just have your session, and then the rest of the week you just don't do anything, right? So you've got to put these practices into place. And I just found this new app that I'm really excited about using for scheduling things on my calendar. So now when you look at my calendar, my morning walk is there. It's on my calendar. My morning meditation's on my calendar. My afternoon meditation's on my calendar. So I tell my clients, make these things calendar events. If you want to go to the gym, put that on your calendar, because if you don't, it's going to get squeezed out. Put your meditation, put it on your calendar. Make an appointment with and for yourself, because we tend to make our last priority. It's like, oh, I'm too tired to do my meditation today. It's 10 o'clock. I'm getting ready to go to bed. I didn't get it in, and I'll get it tomorrow. You have to make it a priority.
I completely agree. And I was talking to one of my clients last week, and she's been getting some really good results. But I said to her that what will happen is that because you're not necessarily following the meal plan at the moment, you're going to hit a plateau. So before we get there, let us start to put things in place. And I said to her exactly what you said. You need to do a meal prep. So what to do is put the event in your calendar, because she's very good at her job. And I said to her, because you're very good at your job, it means that you have things that you have to do for your job in your schedule. And she said, yes. I said, well, good. Take that ethos and apply it to your personal life, your gym life, and put the meal plan in your calendar. And I told her to choose a day. And she texted me, I think it was yesterday or Saturday. And she says, yes, it's already in the calendar. And then she texted me yesterday and she says, meal prep done. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
perfect.
And one of my mentors always said is that the most important things you put in your calendar and you write down. So if something is not in your calendar or not written down, subconsciously is not really that important to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a very big hack that people can apply in their personal life, their work life, even spending time with a partner. If you're a busy person, you put that time in your calendar so that when you are with them, it means that there's no guilt that you should be working or should be doing other things because you've scheduled the time with yourself.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's a quite important thing that people should do. So,
yeah. Just to interrupt you for a second, I think this is a really important point. We have important things and we have urgent things in our life. and we have unimportant things, and we have things that don't really matter. So there's like 4 buckets of things, right? So what we tend to do is we tend to run around doing all the urgent things. I have to pay this bill, or I have to go to this meeting because it's with another person, so it's time sensitive. But the important things, a lot of times we don't put on our calendar, like our workout, like our meal prep, stuff like that. And then even though they're important, they get squeezed out because they're not considered urgent. So that's why I think, as you were saying, it's really, really important that we put those things in our calendar. And we make them, at least somewhat urgent, right? If I don't get my walk in at 6:30, it's okay. I can still start at 7:00. So it's not like it has to be done then. But what I was saying about this app, I really like about it because it's using AI, and I love technology. And what it does is, if you don't get it done at a certain time, it'll move it on your calendar for you. So, but it stays there, right, until you check it off and say it's done. And I'm really excited about it. I just started using it last week, and I'm putting everything on I'm telling people I'm putting everything on my calendar now.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I completely agree with what you're saying, that with having the buckets of things. Because, like, when I was a civil engineer, what I used to do is I used to rate things from 1 to 5. So 5 being most important, 4 being important, or the went to 1. And I found that a 1 can easily become a 5 if it's actually not managed well.
Yeah.
So I had to use all different types of tactics to be able to stay, up to date in my documentation and my site visits and stuff like that. And I find that, and this is why, like, sometimes you can even put color codes in your calendar for certain events, where red would be like urgent, then purple or whatever could be, like important, and then blue would be just under that, etc., etc. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you have to find a tactic that will work for you.
Right.
But I think both of us are saying you have to put it in your calendar, and then find there's just the nuance of how you manage that. Because, like you said, a thing that's important will end up getting squeezed, and then that then can become urgent over time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, like doing my meditation, it's one of those things where I can easily say to myself, well, if I don't get it done today, that's okay, and but then that becomes 2 days, and then 3 days, and next thing you know, you have meditated for a week, and you're just really out of the habit. So again, find what works for you. I love technology, so I like using apps. I use Insight Timer. I like putting things on a digital calendar. Some people like to write things down. Whatever it is that works for you. But whatever keeps you in that habit, whatever keeps it to the front of your mind, that you're like, this is important, okay? It's just as important for me to meditate today as it is for me to take a shower, and have that kind of mentality.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in your book, it has planted, not buried. So can you break down what you mean by that?
Yeah, it actually comes from a quote from the Bible where Jesus talks about, unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it falls to the ground and it dies, it produces much fruit. And so the thing about when we plant a seed, and we call it planting a seed, it's not burying. When we bury something, it's not coming back, right? We bury something to get rid of it. We plant something expecting it to grow. We expect a yield. We expect something to come of it. But it's interesting because in grief, just like with a plant, it doesn't happen right away. We don't look at the seed at the ground and go, grow. It takes a while. It takes a process. And so the events that we go through when it first happens to us, we feel like we've been buried. I mean, when my daughter passed away, I was like, this is it. I'm done. I don't want to be here. All those things that we say. But then later on, I realized, oh, okay, there's something coming from this. There's something that's growing from this. I'm getting a new perspective on life. And surrounding myself by other people who are going through similar things, I got to see people. Now, I mentioned that woman that was 10 years out. That was a terrible example. I also saw people who were 10 years out that were truly inspirational, who had gone through amazing transformations and were doing incredible things, with loss. And I was telling you before we started recording, I just interviewed a woman a few weeks ago. And this woman was born with a disability. She was born missing fingers on one of her hands. Her mother was mentally ill. Her mother was committed to a mental hospital when she was like 6. Her mother took her own life when she was 17. She lost her son to suicide. She lost her husband, and she lost a brother. And then she had a neurological thing that caused her to lose her career. She was a dentist. And I'm interviewing this woman. She's like in, I think, her mid-60s. And she was so happy. She was so excited about going to spend time with her daughters and her grandchildren. And I was thinking, you could focus on all this terrible stuff that's gone on in your life, but you've chosen to focus on what you have as opposed to what you don't have. And that's that mindset that I've seen in people. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it.
Yeah, it is true. I think it's something that we as humanity are going to have to face sooner than later, because with the way the world is changing, we're going to have to find different tools and techniques to manage grief, because, I mean, the way the world is going is only getting harder and harder. And as life gets harder and harder, without the proper techniques and tools or even knowledge, the grief is going to be insane. And I joke and say sometimes that we're going to have a zombie apocalypse, but information like this can really go a long way to preventing that. Because, I mean, you see, to be honest, the way I see humanity now is that a lot of people are just simply losing their minds, and you can see it a lot on social media, how you interact with people. It's like next level. So,
Yeah.
question then: if you were to have this conversation with your younger self, say 20 or 30 years younger, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
The advice I would give myself would be to not take everything so seriously, to not think that it's always the end. It's interesting what you were talking about, the way the world is going, which is really, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. But on the other hand, there's a lot of really good things going on also. We live in relative luxury. More people are fed and healthy now than ever have been. Even though it seems like there's a lot of discord in the world, and there is. We haven't had a world war in a while. I'm not going to say we're never going to have another one, but we look at things like civil rights have gotten better, all over the world, et cetera. So it's really a matter of how we look at it. So I think when it comes to what's going on right now, we can look at everything, and this is what I try to do: is like, what's the opportunity in this? Because we were talking about disappointment and grief and stuff, and I was thinking about what the election we just had in the United States. No matter what happened, no matter which person won, 50% of the people in this country were going to feel like it's the end of the world. And I'm like, this is really interesting, right? There was no outcome where 50% of the people weren't like really grossly, bitterly disappointed. That's how divided we are. So what is that about? What do we do with that? How do we handle that going forward? And I interviewed a guy recently who had a near-death experience, and he's become clairvoyant. He could see things happening in the future. And he was like giving me a different perspective to look at on the outcome from the election. And I'm like, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Rather than looking at it from my perspective as being a disaster, what might come of this? And the world, I mean, I think we would all agree it's a mess in a lot of ways right now. But the question is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do about it? And a lot of times from tragedy comes growth. So maybe the world, and I think sometimes people need that. We need to be shaken up. We need crap to happen in our lives to knock us off of our path, to realize this is not the way we want to go.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm starting to surround myself more and more with the idea that every sort of disappointment is actually an opportunity for growth. And while I knew that, I say surrounding myself because you would know things and then you sort of like go away from that thinking for a little bit and then you come back and then because life is more like how a river is. It meanders and it's never a straight line. It's never constant. Sometimes the sea may be rough and sometimes it's calm. And a few things have happened to me like this year and then also recently that I'm starting to come back then to that understanding and that knowing that with every sort of quotation marks disappointment, then there's an opportunity to grow. And then I started to ask myself, well, why do I think is a disappointment? And the root cause I came to was attachment. And the mad thing about it is that I know that. I knew that. I tell people about that. But then again, like sometimes in you knowing these things, you kind of like forget, right? And it seems like if that is part of the human experience where you go and you come back because your growth is never linear. You always have these moments of down, then you have up, right? It is like if you look at a chart of a stock, the chart, excuse me, the stock does that, even if it's say over 10 years has went up from year 0 to year 10, there have been moments where they've had massive corrections. But overall, you would say the stock has gone up. And our lives are very, very much like that. And I think that, because I was having a very interesting conversation with my neighbor yesterday, and she was saying that it is all about your expectations as well. So she's saying to me, she said to me, well, Todd, I just don't have expectations anymore. And she said that if you don't have expectations, then you can't really have disappointments because the disappointments will come according to the attachment because you're attached to the result. So it's really, she really, like, I said to myself, I'm kind of listening to myself here, right? Talk to me. And I think that was quite interesting.
I have to push back on that a little bit. It's funny because I just wrote a little short thing on Substack about that a little while ago about, emotions. And it reminds me of Star Trek. And I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I grew up during the time when Star Trek was on, originally, and Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk, which two, I think, really great characters to show kind of extremes, right? Because Kirk was so emotional and Spock was so logical. And I thought, if I could be like Spock, that would be great, right? And so people will take this teaching and say, if I just have no expectations, then I can never be disappointed. But we can't really live life with no expectations. We all have preferred outcomes. We want our loved ones to be happy and healthy and whole, right? So we might say we have no expectations, but we do want our loved ones to be healthy. We want to be healthy. So I don't think we can bypass the human spirit. And what you said was really important, though, is that back and forth. It's the catching ourselves and saying, I'm getting too caught up in this. I'm getting too caught up in the humanity. I need to, like one of my clients said, it's like when you scuba dive, it's that buoyancy thing. So you want to achieve neutral buoyancy. So we want to be spiritual, but we don't want to say, okay, I'm going to bypass the experience of being human. Because if that were the case, we could all say, I'm never going to be disappointed again because I just won't expect anything. And I don't think that's humanly possible. And I don't think it's really desirable. I don't think that's what we're here for. I think we're here to learn to deal with the disappointments and to grow with them. And, you were talking about, it reminded me of a couple stories. One is an old story everybody's probably heard about the Taoist farmer that he finds a wild stallion and all of his neighbors come running up and they go, it's great you found a wild stallion. And he brings the stallion in. And then the next day his son is trying to break the stallion and he falls off and he breaks his leg. And all the neighbors rush in. They go, it's terrible that your son broke his leg. And then the next day the army comes and they're conscripting people in the army and they bypass the kid because he's broken his leg. And all the neighbors go, it's great that the army bypassed your kid. And the whole time the farmer's saying, well, maybe, because he never judges the situation. And that's great. That's a very equanimous position to be in. But again, I don't think as humans we can quite get there. And then one last thing I'll say, because a story that always it really taught me a lesson, when this was about 27 years ago, my daughter was 9 months old and I got fired from a job. And I get fired and my wife's not working because she's staying at home with my daughter. And I'm thinking, this is terrible. I got fired from my job. I don't have any income. What's going to happen? Well, long story short, I took another job. I made 3 times more money than I'd ever made. It pushed me out of a job that I really shouldn't have been in the first place. I should have left that job before. And I realized with time that was actually a good thing that happened to me. So I try to see that in the moment, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to be disappointed with things that are happening right now. Again, with the election that just happened, I'm still very disappointed at the results. I'm still very disappointed that people here chose what they chose. That's my opinion. But I try to think, well, what's going to happen in the long run? I think I know it's going to be okay. It always is.
I'm actually surprised that you made that statement, because most of the people that are disappointed think that the world is ending. So that's kind of interesting that you say that, because the thing is, for me, I am a political atheist and I don't support any side in general, because I'm a bit of what you would call an anarcho-capitalist. What that means is that anarchy, the true meaning, so when you look at the word anarchy, the third definition means living without rulers or being ruled. And that is the ethos that I use, which is similar to the non-aggression principle. I don't interfere with you, you don't interfere with me, but I have the right to defend myself, right? And I think that if people had that value, the world would be a completely different place. Yeah. So for me, I see both sides as actually being corrupt, and both sides being part of the same 7-headed dragon that's trying to destroy humanity.
Sure.
So for me, I actually think it's good. And the reason why I think it's good is that what's going to happen is that the other side, in trying to destroy him, are going to reveal themselves to confirm the things that I just said, that they're both all bad, right? So from that point of view, I am happy, but not in the actual result of the character or the person. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And when you mentioned the word anarchy, I like what Gandhi said. Gandhi was in favor of enlightened anarchy, which I'm like, that's great, because if we were all enlightened, we wouldn't need governments, right? Because we would all just do the right thing. I love that. First step is everybody has become enlightened. So yeah, and that's what this guy was interviewing was kind of saying. It's like, because I don't think he was really political either. It's like, it's like, I'm not really thrilled with the guy that won, but I think things need to be exposed. And one thing I think we can all agree on is our governments have let us down. I don't think anybody's happy with the way the government operates. So one side says, let's just tear it all down. And the other side says, let's try to maintain what we've got. And, we'll see where it ends up. But what I'm hopeful for is that people will wake up and say, we are all one. We're as humanity, we're all one. It stopped this fighting between races and cultures and classes and countries, and let's come together. And and then we wouldn't need, as you said, we wouldn't need these institutions. So I'm all for that.
Yeah, because I see government as an unnecessary evil, and I've traveled to many countries in the world, and I speak 2 foreign languages, and I'm always in awe why we as a race, because the thing is, I don't even really see us as like race as being a black, white, Indian, Chinese. I see us as subgroups of the human race. And I always am marveled as to why there's not a lot more cohesion, where there's a lot more mixing in the subgroups, because I think that each subgroup has a lot of sort of like talents and abilities that can be taught and transferred to the other subgroups. And therefore we could get even better quality food. We could get better mindset, because, for example, the people in Southeast Asia tend to be a lot more disciplined for business and hard work, right? And there's something in that subgroup that most of those people actually do kind of well when they go to Western countries.
Yeah.
And then we have native-born Westerners that, obviously, I don't want to generalize, but I would say the bigger percentage are not necessarily of that mindset, right?
Mhm.
Then you have some subgroups that cook really, really well. So it's like, why are we not sharing more information, learning each other's languages? And because in reality, humans should be able to speak 5, 6, 7 main languages, so that you could go to all different parts, mix and mingle with people, and learn from each other. Because I
Yeah.
think that it's
Yeah.
in the learning and sharing that we actually realize exactly what you're saying. We're really all one. We have the same emotions, the same disappointments. We all will deal with grief, right? So
Mhm.
it means we're really the same.
Yeah, we're absolutely the same. And I am not a conspiracy theorist or an anarchist of any sort necessarily. I've been said more like Gandhi. I like to get us to a point where we don't need governments. But even though I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I have studied enough history to understand there is a group of people that wants to keep us divided. And it's not even necessarily by race. They use race as a way of keeping us divided. But they're people, these are the what we call the oligarchs. These are the people, the ruling class, that say, hey, you poor white man, look at that black man over there. He wants to take your job. You're better than he is. So there is a concerted effort to keep us divided so that the few people that have the control can keep the control. That is an intentional thing. And it's funny you talked about language. You said we should all be able to speak 5 or 6 languages. Sadly, I live in the U.S. and I only speak one language. When I have traveled, I feel very embarrassed by that. But I remember when I was a kid, like in 5th or 6th grade, someone came up with a language called Esperanto. And they're like, we want to make this an international language that everybody can speak. And people were like, no, we can't have one language. That would be terrible. I don't see why that's terrible. I think that would be great.
I concur. I concur. And, I've said this quite a bit on my shows. I've said that if we, as a human race, spoke the same language, we would never be able to be enslaved because we would be able to share information. Because imagine the stuff we're talking about now. The people in Russia, for the most part, and they're 182 million from memory, they would not be able to get any value from this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because we don't speak Russian and most don't speak English.
Right.
So I think it's a real shame that they're not real, integration of the subgroups where
Right.
it is like, we should be able to go from one. And I think the whole idea of country is a bad idea as well. I think that
Totally agree.
what should really be happening is that things should be managed on a village level, right? Because then now the people that are managing are actually in the village or town, and you can go and knock on his door and say, hey, Brian, well, we paid a lot of money to you to fix that road. What's going on, mate? And you could be like, well, you know me, but no, you won't be able to hide, right? But because you have a central tower and all the money is going there, there's 36,000 degrees of separation from the man on the street to actually the governance. And there's a very interesting town, I think from memory it's in Chiapas, in Mexico, where they've kicked out the mayor, the police, all government is gone in this particular town. And what they do is that they have a system where I think it's every 6 months or a year, where one person would become the quotation marks governor. So it rotates every single year. So it's almost like, it's my turn to go and lead. It's not something that you're actually looking forward to go and do, right? Because it's a responsibility. And everybody, they have their own private security. And I watched an interview with the natives, and basically theft and crime and all that kind of stuff has gone down like 99%. It's absolutely insane. And they use their own money. They don't have the actual Mexican money they use. They have like their own money that they use. And they're totally, because what was happening is that I think that area was for logging. So what was happening, there was a lot of corruption in terms of the logging of the area, and the politicians were obviously getting kickbacks, and it was making the entire area really bad with, I think from memory, there was a lot of flooding because of the stripping of the vegetation from the land, etc., etc. So all the
Mm-hmm.
problems were, the root cause was basically corruption. So they kicked them out. They kicked out. And if you wanted to come in and you have any like bumper sticker with a political affiliation, you can't get in.
Mm.
And yeah, and they have armed guards from the entrance and the exit, and they pay, the villagers pay the wages of the security, and people have their doors open. There's a lot of sharing, and people actually are like looking out for one another. And I don't see why that model can't be exported globally, where, you know, things are managed on a much smaller level, where is the people in that area that are the ones making it better. Because, you know, I think that humanity could strive and thrive, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard of that concept. I hadn't heard of it actually being done anywhere, but I've heard people talk about going back to more, you know, the smaller, the more local the government, the better. But, you know, talk about the language thing, you know, and this is where I do get hope, because with technology again, we could put a video out on YouTube of the two of us speaking, and somebody in Russian could actually, you know, get live translation of it, right? And there's technology now you can put on your phone, and you can, when you're traveling, you can speak in English into your phone, and it'll live translate it into, you know, Japanese or whatever. Excuse me. So what I see is the world is coming together. At the same time, we live in these information silos, you know, in the United States. It's really weird because both things are happening at the same time. I literally have access to anything anywhere in the world, but a lot of people are choosing just to take a very small, you know, silo of information. But it's out there, and that's what I think is going to. That's what they're not going to be able to hold back forever. People are going to start to come together. You know, I can communicate with people anywhere around the world right now, unless their government's, say, blocking the internet, for example. But as this is happening, people are starting to realize that we're all the same. We've got this, as you said, the same desires, the same goals. And most people, the only reason why they care about, you know, for example, their country is because we're told that we're supposed to care about our country, because we're told those people are coming to get you. But it's not those people, it's their government, which is just as corrupt as our government. So when we all start to see that our governments are corrupt, hopefully we'll get to the point where we say, yeah, we don't need this anymore. We don't want this anymore. And so that's where I see that, you know, maybe even some good coming out of all the chaos that's going on right now. Income inequality in the US is crazy. It's insane. And I saw a chart the other day comparing it to the time of the French Revolution. And I put it on Facebook, and someone goes, well, what happened during that time in France? I'm like, that's called the revolution. That's when the people said, we're tired of this. And I think we're getting to that point.
I definitely agree that there's something happening in the background, because I mean, even like my show, for example, I have listeners in non-English speaking countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that quite amazing, because there seems to be a hunger and a thirst in humanity now to want to break away, because I find like we've been conditioned to hate each other. And because you may be left wing or right wing, we can't get along, we can't be friends.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that we have a lot more in common with each other than we do with the ruling class. And the ruling class, the oligarchs, they're the ones that are causing us to hate each other. And I'll be honest with you, right? So I think that a universal language of a high vibration would be fantastic for humanity, because I read a book recently called Word Magic, and that book kind of like enlightened me on a lot of things. Some of the things I knew and other things I didn't know. And the English language, even though I'm an native English speaker, I realized that the English language puts a lot of limitations on us through speech.
Yeah.
So I would be very happy to come out of my comfort zone to learn another language if it is of high vibration,
Yeah.
so that the mental gymnastics that we do to ourselves would disappear, where we're speaking and manifesting and creating in a positive way, and there's no word trickery, because there's so much trickery in even like the word good morning. Morning is close to the word morning. So you're actually basically saying good morning every single day you speak to someone, right?
Mm.
And then the system that we live in is set up on admiralty law. So when a ship goes into dock, it's going into the berth area. So it's the berthing, So it's all these kind of tricks that they play on us that I would sign up tomorrow, to be honest, to learn a language that would give us a lot more higher level of consciousness. And because I think that it would help us to overcome the challenges that we have right now on Earth, because we've definitely lost our way, and as a species, we're struggling a lot.
Yeah.
You can tell we're lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are, and I think, as you said, I think people are longing for, they're longing for a coming together. They're longing for more equality. They're longing for more autonomy, more freedom. We realize that we don't have to live this way, and I'm always reminded of the story of the story of the man who killed the goose that laid the golden eggs. Right. So the thing is, the oligarchs, the people that are ruling over us, you want to fleece the sheep. You don't want to kill them, and they push it too far. And I think they're going to the point where they're pushing it too far now, and people are going, we don't want to live. We don't have to live this way, because we're the ones that give them the power, in a sense, in a very real sense. There are a whole lot more of us than there are of them. That's why they have to have these culture wars, because they don't want to fight a class war. So what they do is they keep us separated by saying, you, the immigrants coming for your job, and the trans people, like right now, it's big in the U.S. to go after trans people. I always have to find somebody to go after to keep us separated, so we don't look at them and say, well, wait a minute, you're the one that's actually causing the problem. So that's where I'm hopeful that maybe we're going to get to a breaking point, and that's what humans need. We have to get to a tipping point, because we'll get very comfortable even in bad situations, just because we've been taught this is as good as it gets. And when it gets to the point where people don't accept that anymore, that's when revolutions happen. And I think we might be close to that.
Yeah, I concur, and I think that this is why conversations like this are very, very important. So I'm curious, what are some of your influences, mentors, and sources that have helped you and taught you what's behind the veil of perception and reality?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I've got a lot of, as I start off as a fundamentalist Christian, so there are a lot of Christian authors in my background, C.S. Lewis. So people like that. I'm blanking out on the other guy's name right now, but then more recently, there's a guy named Charles Eisenstein, who's kind of philosophical guy, and he wrote a book, and it's got a really weird title. It's like The Better World That We All Would Have If We Could Imagine It, or something like that. It's a really convoluted title, but he's a big thinker, like you're talking about, like changing the way the government works, changing the way money works. I mean, one example, he talks about money. He goes, money is the only thing in nature that actually grows when you hold on to it. Nature is designed that when you hold on to things, they corrupt. You can't hold on to food forever; it decays. And there's this backward system with the more money I have, the better off I am, and I can just put it in the bank and they pay me more interest. He said, what if we reverse that? What if we made it so people had to move money around? People had to use money. And he made a really good point. Like, most of the time, most of us are sitting with more money in our bank accounts than we need. And other people need it, but the reason we don't give it to them is because it wouldn't be there when we needed it. So what if we devise a system that would, flip that on its head? So people like that. There's a guy named Bernardo Kastrup, who talks about, he's a computer scientist and a PhD in philosophy. And he talks about this idea of idealism versus realism, which says that everything is consciousness, that consciousness is fundamental. That's what everything rises out of, as opposed to material. So people like that are coming along and trying to tell people, the world is not what it looks like to you. You're not what you think you are. That all the things we're talking about, we're all one. Studying near-death experiences has been a really big influence on me. People who have been to the other side and seen what's like after we cross from here and come back and tell us, okay, the world again is not what you think it is. We started talking before we got started about, like, are things planned or do things happen randomly? I think the answer is yes. It's actually both. But I truly believe that in the overall arch of things, everything that happens is for the good. And I've seen that in my own life. Like I mentioned to you, like when I got fired from my job, when I got divorced, everything that I've been through, something good has come out of. And I think that's true for mankind in general too. So it's been people like that and thinking like that that's really influenced, where I am today. I took a course called Positive Intelligence, which is by a guy named 𝑵𝒐𝒕 𝑩𝒖𝒓𝒊𝒆𝒅. And that's the mental fitness aspect of what I help people with, is that understanding that all the things we're talking about, all this mindset stuff, you've got to really work hard to hold on to it, because it's counter to our ego, our natural human nature, which is very much trying to protect us from danger around us. So how do I maintain that mindset? And that's by doing things like we talked about earlier, those mental things that we have to do, those exercises that we do every day.
Yeah, is mindset is basically a muscle. It's something that you need to exercise every day, because, like I said to you earlier, where the things that I teach my clients, then I kind of like forgot some of the stuff, right? Because certain things happened to me, and I was like, actually, you know what? This is what I need to do, and this is the concept that I talk about. And it's not that I wasn't practicing it, but what happens is that you tend to sometimes get a little bit separated from a particular distinction, because again, life is not linear. It moves in waves, and you have up waves and down waves, So I'm curious, have you ever done psychedelics? And if so, which ones?
No, I haven't. It's something that I'm interested in, just never had the opportunity. But it's something, yeah, it's something I haven't done yet. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, okay. I think you would find psychedelics quite interesting, because I have done my fair share of psychedelics, and I like the only medicine that I don't really particularly like is peyote, and that's the one that's the cactus, and you have to eat it, and because it's just so bitter, right? But like, I'm a person that I like food and stuff, so like the concept of swallowing something and you can't eat it per se is too bitter. It literally is like the most bitter thing you ever taste in your life. But I've done magic mushrooms. I've done peyote. I've done 𝑵𝒊𝒆𝒅, which is one you smoke from the frog. That's really good for like healing of the heart. So people that have had like heartbreak, even grief, very good to come to terms with the passing of a loved one and stuff like that. It's also good for people that have like problems with addiction for substances and stuff like that, because of the DMT inside of it. Ayahuasca as well. I've done it a few times. And so if you're interested, then just let me know offline.
Now, I've heard ayahuasca is pretty rough, though. You talked about the peyote.
Ayahuasca is an interesting medicine. So what makes it so interesting is that they call her the mother. And so she, like a mother, can be a very strict disciplinarian, and she can beat you up. And that mostly comes in the form of purging.
Yeah.
And you perf both holes.
Yeah.
So sometimes simultaneously, right? But most of my experiences where I've had the most purging was mostly at the beginning. And then the exception was the last time I did it in September. But that came from basically what I didn't know is that if you have sugar after you just have the ceremony, you can actually have another trip, which is what happened to me. Yeah.
Wow.
So that night I drank about 4 cups or 3, 1 to 2. And very, very, very little purging. I traveled and then I came back, it was good. And then after they came around and said, oh, do you want an apple? And obviously because you don't eat for several hours, I was like, yeah, why not? So I had an apple and within 15 minutes, I was flying again. And then the purging came and I was like, wow, it was like insane. So it was a lesson learned. So again, I have to use that instead of saying that was a bad experience to say that it happened for the better good, because I learned that
Yeah.
I'm not going to eat anything sweet at all after I have ayahuasca. But it's very, very visionary. You are able to see past lives. You're able to connect with entities or beings. And in my case, mostly is the voice. And I always call it the voice, which is basically my higher self. And I would have a conversation in my head with the voice. So it's very interesting. 𝒊𝒄 is my favorite medicine because you smoke it and it's instantaneous. Pretty much within 10 seconds, you're flying. It's the most powerful psychedelic there is on the planet. And because it's the most powerful, it lasts the shortest time. So maximum, it depends on where you are. I've seen people being knocked out for half an hour, but that's an exception. Most of the time, within 15 minutes, you're back. Sometimes 10. But when you're traveling, because it's like a rocket ship, it goes up, and then it goes across, and then boom, back down. Because it is so strong, it happens for such a short period of time. When you're in that state, it feels like if it's like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Literally, it feels like it's 2 hours. But the amount of learning that you would get, and it's really good for like healing of the heart, because when I was really going through the height of my dark night of the soul, or my refinement period, as I call it, I got introduced to 𝒊𝒄, and yeah, it did a lot to make me feel whole and complete again. And it was after like then that I started to really delve down this spiritual path, because I was at the beginning of it, and it came at a time where I really, really needed it. So I was just interested to find out if you had done it, because like a lot of people that talk similar to me have dabbled even with like LSD or something like that, you know?
Plant medicines are really, really interesting and, of course, very controversial. I know some people would say it's great as a Kickstarter for spiritual exploration. Other people say, well, you can't bypass having natural experiences. I don't have any judgment on it, one way or the other. I think we all have different things that we need, different things that take us to where we need to be. It's interesting because I've studied near-death experiences a lot, and there's a guy named Ken Ring that discovered them, or that was researching them, and he said studying near-death experiences can give you the same effect as actually having a near-death experience if you very intently study them. So even though I haven't had an experience, a lot of times people ask me, "Well, have you had an experience?" Because you seem to have a lot of the insights that people that have had the experience, and I'm like, no, I haven't had one myself, but I've been so immersed in it. I think I've kind of absorbed that mindset. So again, not opposed to doing psychedelics. Frankly, I'm probably scared to do them because I don't like losing control. So I don't know. But for me, I study NDEs. I just got turned on to this podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, which is they study these autistic children. And they found out that they have amazing telepathic abilities. They can talk to spirit. They can predict the future. They talk to each other. And I've just been absorbed in that podcast for like the last week or so, hearing about how these kids that we think are non-communicative are really like a lot more advanced than we are telepathically. So stuff like that is what turns me on.
I'm not surprised about what you said with the autistic kids, because I am starting to think now a lot more that autistic kids are able to see in different realms. Because when I look at how an autistic person or child would behave, And then I look at when we have very young children that have not been corrupted by the programming, you see them talking to imaginary friends and you see them interacting in a way like if there's someone else there in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of thinking, well, okay, because I've done psychedelics now and I've had, I guess you could call it out-of-body experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's the right term, but for the lack of a better word, I would use that. And I see a lot of similarities where
Mm-hmm.
when I'm traveling, the experience I'm having feels absolutely real. And when you look at children that have not really had the programming from the TV, etc., and all the other stuff that comes with it, they interact like if they're actually people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you look at an autistic person, the way they would like sometimes just stare into space and then be bouncing, and then sometimes they be doing things like if there's actually someone there next to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of started to think recently, like, well, maybe psychedelics is just the ability to get to that realm where the children and the autistic people, and even say a person that's supposed to be schizophrenic,
Yeah.
are able to access.
Right.
And we, the quotation marks, normal ones, may not actually be the normal ones because they're seeing
or people with
different
dementia.
levels of light.
Yeah.
So
People with dementia, both of my in-laws had dementia. And toward the end, when my father-in-law was having his and he was talking about other people, I just assumed it was all hallucinations. And some of it, I think either was or he didn't know how to put it in language that we could understand. But when my mother-in-law was going through it, I was like, oh yeah, she's definitely interacting with people who are on the other side. So our brains they're a filter. They block all that stuff out. And what I believe psychedelics, autism, dementia, schizophrenia, that allows people to see into those realms. And we say, well, they're either of diminished capacity or they're crazy because we can't see it. And the great thing about like the telepathy tapes is these people they're like reading their parents' minds, and they're doing experiments and they're showing. Like the parent can look at an Uno card. The kid, without seeing it, can say what color and what number it is. They can tell them what word they're thinking of. They visit each other. The episode I just listened to, this was really wild. This one kid, he passed away, and he the day before he went to like a lot of the other ones in the community and said, I'm leaving. It's my time to go back on the other side. I can't get my mission accomplished while I'm still here. So I'm going to be leaving the body. So they knew he was leaving. And so the next day when they were starting to tell the kids, they're like, oh yeah, we knew. He told us he was going.
wow, that is insane.
But that's the ability that I believe that we all have, like you said, and I love what you said. It's like that programming. We come in, we're told it's not true, it's not possible. We can't communicate telepathically. There's nobody else in the room. So I think we need to get back to that level of understanding and things like you're talking about. I think psychedelics, I absolutely believe people are seeing other realms. I mean, I forget where I heard it, but there was this one guy that was taking people on a trip. It was somewhere in South America. And this woman looks up on this mountain and she says, I see these beings going up and down the mountain. He goes, yeah, everybody that comes here sees them. So it wasn't her own unique experience. It's like, yeah, I know who they are because everybody that comes here and does the trip, they see them.
Well, this is why I say, I've said before that I think that if 51% of humanity does psychedelics, this planet would be an absolutely different place, because most people that do psychedelics you can actually almost put it in the same category as a NDE. And the reason why I say that is that the human brain produces the most DMT during childbirth and at the time of death. That's an absolute fact. And DMT is the main component in 𝑵𝒂𝒊𝒆𝒅, but is a slightly different type. It's 5-MeO DMT, which is what makes it stronger. And then ayahuasca is DMT. So what you're doing basically, and also you produce DMT while you're sleeping, small levels of it. This is how like you end up having dreams and connecting into the dream world and stuff. So my point here is that if DMT is involved in childbirth, death, and during psychedelic experiences, it means then that if we had more interaction with psychedelics as a species, it means then that we would start to have higher levels of learning, and we'd be learning things that are not of this world. We'd be learning the inner parts of us, the spiritual parts of us, because I think that is one of the main areas that is neglected on Earth. Because if you just look at it, most people, they have no concept of spirituality. And if you do talk about spirituality, the normal people, the normies, as I call them, would be thinking you're just talking about crystals and sage, right?
Yeah.
But it's way more to that, you know?
Yeah. Only caution I have there is people try to explain away near-death experiences with all kinds of materialistic explanations. It's the lack of oxygen to the brain. It's just an hallucination. It's produced by DMT, for example. And I'm not saying it is or isn't, but the thing is, then people say they then put a category of hallucination. It's not real because they don't understand there is another realm. So yeah, maybe if more people had that experience, and they could come back and say it actually is a real thing, because this goes back to the idea that Dr. Kashaba mentioned earlier. Idealism is like the conscious realms that we talk about. They're not just mental states; they are actual. It's reality. Now, it's not necessarily a place, and that's what we as humans can't really figure out. Like, how can it be real and it's not a place? Well, same way Einstein told us that time is an illusion. It's like, even the space that we live in is an illusion. There is no time and space, in reality. So, I 100%, we need to have a shift. And I think I think all these bodies of evidence add up to, if people really looked at them, they would say there's something more. If they looked at NDEs, if they looked at these autistic children, if they looked at what psychedelics allow us to be able to see, mediumship, there are people who can communicate with people, on the other side. So I think that all those things together add up to a really, really strong body of evidence that supports what you and I think, both believe.
Yeah, I concur. So I think it's fair to say that mainstream education doesn't teach us about any of the things that we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any ideas on how we can help increase and evolve the consciousness of man during this challenging time?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, I think I know there's a huge body of evidence out there. And I think podcasts like yours, podcasts like mine, books by some people that are coming out, and we're going to have to bypass the main education system, because it's been so corrupted in the last 200 years to have this materialist mindset. It's like since probably like the late 1800s, where it's been like, if you can't see it, if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. So we've got to break through that. And there's, again, it's funny. I have a really good friend. She's a good friend now, but she's a classic materialistic atheist, and her husband had passed away. And she goes, I know all mediums are fake, but I'm going to give you a chance, because you really seem to believe this. You seem like an intelligent person. Tell me the best medium you know, and I'm going to go see this person, and I'm going to prove to myself once and for all that mediumship isn't real. So I gave her the person's name. She used a fake credit card. She used a fake name. She went to her. She was blown away. So she came back to me. She goes, what else is there out there that I don't know about? So I started telling her about all this other stuff, giving her books. She's a really smart person. And she came back to me and she goes, why didn't I know any of this existed? And it's like I was listening to something they were talking about this morning. That's the idea of, if you don't look for something, if you don't believe it's possible, you can't see it. So we need to, one person at a time, wake people up and say, here, read this book, listen to this podcast, explain this to me. One person, and I keep going back to these tapes because I'm obsessed with them right now. The telepathy tapes. She has this cameraman. He's a total materialist. And he goes in, he sees this kid do these amazing things, reading minds, saying which card's been drawn, which word you're thinking, describing a picture, looking, all that stuff. And she talks to him. He goes, look, I'm a total materialist. I don't believe any of this stuff, but I've seen it. I don't know how I can deny it now. So we need to get stuff like that in front of people. And then eventually the paradigm will shift back, because what I always try to remind people is the mindset that we have now, it's only about 200 years old. For most of man's existence, we believed in the soul. We believed in spirit. We believed in a creator. We believed in all that stuff. And then we got to the point where we said, we don't need that stuff anymore. We're big boys now. We can explain everything. And if we can't explain it yet, we will be able to soon. And so we need to just show those people you're absolutely wrong.
Yeah, I think that's very good, what you said there. And the thing is, right, is that this is why scripture says, seek and you shall find. And if you're not actually seeking for it, you're not really going to find it,
Right.
So,
right.
Let's talk a little bit about, because we were talking a bit about the world and the state of the world, but, we are under severe mind control at the moment, most people, I would say. Do you think or see any hope that humanity will wake up from its deep sleep and arise to its highest potential?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, as I said, I think we need to see crises. And it's interesting because I have a lot of friends who are psychic. And, some were saying right before the election, we're coming up to the golden age. It's going to be great. We're turning the corner. And then after the election, they were like, oh, what happened? Yeah, I don't know. There's another podcast called The Event Horizon, which I've been listening to. And they're like, we are like on 3 or 4 different extinction events that could happen. Nuclear holocaust, global climate change, AI. Some people think AI is going to take us down. And then there's, aliens, visitors from outer space. And so some people think what's going to happen is, we're going to get to a point where maybe they're going to come save us, where they're going to have to intervene. I don't know. I grew up being taught that Jesus was coming back any minute. So I'm not really a big, there's going to be some major event thing. I think we're going to wake up slowly. But again, a lot of people are saying, we're coming into the age of Aquarius, and that means something. So I think we are at a turning point. I think we're at a time where we're on the brink of so many crises that something's going to happen that's going to say we're going to have to wake up. You mentioned the 2020, the epidemic, the COVID before, and some people thought that was going to be the event that would bring us together. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out. So I think that we'll get what we need. I think we always get what we need, and I think I know it's going to be okay one way or the other.
Well, that's good to hear that you're positive, because I'm kind of bullish on the future, and I have a mate that he is total opposite, right? He thinks humanity is doomed. There are too many sheep out there, and there's too many brainwashed people. And while I do agree that is true, excuse me, I have a shared different view, because he doesn't do what I do in terms of I remember when I first started even talking about these things on social media, because that's how I basically first started. And I would get very little interaction or messages from people and stuff. And from the time that I started to do podcasts, and then specifically from this year when I started back doing podcasts, and then I did my own show, I get so many messages now. It is insane. I actually have an assistant to help me with my messaging. It is next level. So sometimes I just can't keep up. So if anyone that's listening to this, if you send me a message and you don't hear from me for a few days, it's because literally sometimes I get 50 messages a day, right? On average, the minimum per day is 15, right?
Yeah.
And that is on 4 different platforms. So
yeah,
it can be challenging. But what I am seeing since I first started talking publicly in February 2022 to now, I have seen that now people are hungry and
Mm-hmm.
thirsty for this information.
Yeah.
And I get messages from people from all over. When I say all over, I get messages sometimes from people in Pakistan, right? And I had one girl from Iraq message me, and she says, "Todd, your stuff you talk about really keeps me going. Please
Mm-hmm.
don't stop." So I share a similar belief to you, where I think it's just going to work out in the end, because I mean, good always wins, right? But it's a process we're going through,
It
for sure.
does. It does. And the thing is that people, there's a lot of negative things going, what we perceive as negative things, but it's what wakes people up. There's an epidemic of loneliness right now, which is, it's crazy. You think there's all these people in the world. We're so crowded. There's so many of us, but people feel disconnected. And as we're going back to what you said about me in my introduction, I think it's because we've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten why we're here. We've forgotten where we're going. We're just walking through life. We are being fed just, oh, if you want to be happier, just get more stuff. Just spend more money, make more money, just work harder, and then you'll be happier. And people are realizing that's not working out for me. And it's when we hit that, you mentioned dark night of the soul earlier, but you used another term, which I liked, was, I can't remember what it was.
Refinement period.
Refinement period, and that's another biblical term. The Bible talks about going through the fire and how we're refined by that. That is part of human nature. Whether we may not like it, we may say, well, this sucks. Why do humans have to be this way? That's a whole nother debate, but it's the way we are. So we have to be woken up by realizing that what we're doing is not working. So when we're seeing more and more people realizing things aren't working, that's the catalyst that we need for people to make that shift, for people to say, I'm not what you told me I was. I'm something more than that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the narrative, or the message, as some people like to call it, has been that we are really nothing, and we need an external source or entity or being or government or savior through religion to come and save us. And I think that what has happened is that, this is why I say on my show that, I've never heard anyone coin this, so maybe I'm the first, who knows, but I always say that the three main religions that control this planet and matrix lock, stock, and barrel are the religion of money, the religion of government, and organized religion. I always say that those are the three main religions that rule us completely. And one or all will get you. And in all of those religions, there's an external savior, and you are nothing, so you don't even deserve to be alive. But this thing will come and save you because you're nothing and insignificant. And I say to people that, no, we're actually greater than we think we are, and the power of the universe is inside of us. And it's only when you have that shift to realize that you're greater than they tell you, then that's when you start to get magic happening in your life,
Yeah, I agree with that. I hadn't ever put that way, but I also, and this is not even, there's also this materialistic mindset, and I don't mean that in terms of getting stuff. I mean that in terms of like this so-called scientific mindset, which some people call scientism, which says that there is nothing else. So basically, they're like, abandon all hope. Just eat, drink, and be merry. There's one guy even says, like, basically when people realize what they are, because AI is going to take over the world and everything, just give them video games and drugs, because that's the only thing that's going to placate people. There's this idea that we're just our bodies. We're just an accidental, output of the universe, which is cold and meaningless and doesn't care about us. So that, I believe, is what's causing this loneliness epidemic, that along with the things that you're talking about, which kind of goes, hand in hand with that. So helping people to understand that everything you need is already inside of you, that as you said, no one needs to come save you, that you just need to turn within and all the answers that you seek are there. That's, I think, is what's going to wake people up. And that's what happens when people turn to everything else. I mean, I look at like superstars. People have all the money and all the fame in the world that you could possibly imagine, and they're not happy. And people go, well, why wouldn't you be happy? Because they've got that, and they realize it doesn't satisfy. So now you're even more depressed, because at least as long as you're chasing it, you might think, well, I'm going to be happier once I make $1 million, or once I make $2 million, or once I get that promotion, then I'll be happy. But when you stand there and you've got it all and you're not happy, that's when you're the most depressed. And so what we need to do to help people realize none of those things are going to make you happy. More money is not going to make you happier. More status is not going to make you happier. More power is not going to make you happier. It's what's within your heart.
Absolutely. And, with the invention of the internet and social media, we have seen a deterioration of the social dynamics between men and women, where a lot of girls on social media now are OnlyFans, and the guys have just become simps. So what are your thoughts on this phenomenon?
It's really sad. It's really sad, and it really, again, is that not understanding our value, not understanding what it is that we're really craving, and not to get religious, because I'm not religious at all. But I remember when I was in Sunday school, they said, everybody has this God-shaped hole in their heart, and the only thing they can fill that hole is God. And they were talking about the white man in the sky who's all judgmental. But I say we all have that longing, that need for connection. And when we don't get it met, we find other ways to do it. So whether it's through pornography or watching OnlyFans or whatever it happens to be, it's trying to fill something with something that doesn't work. So again, I think, people just have to find that for themselves. They have to chase those things down for a while and then realize this is not doing it. And then they'll turn to something else.
Yeah, I think you said it really well there. I didn't think of it like that, where it's actually a void that they're trying to fill. But then at the same time, I guess when I think back and what I said early in this conversation, the less spiritual we've become, now what you said, the more of the void is created.
Mm-hmm.
And this being spiritual is part of the process of knowing thyself. So that's why Yeshua said that the key is to know thyself,
Yeah.
So
I cringe a little even at the word spiritual, because to me it's just understanding who you are. It's just really understanding reality. We've almost conceded ground to the materialists and said, okay, well, that's the normal paradigm, and we are spiritual people. I'm like, no, I'm just a realist. I'm just going where the data is leading me. I'm looking at science. I'm looking at who I am. I'm looking at my heart, and I'm seeing that this is what I am. This is who and I think we all know that. I know we all know that at some level. As you mentioned, the higher self earlier, we all know that at some level, but we choose to come here. We choose to wear the veil. We choose to forget. And then there's this game we play with ourselves where we're trying to remember. And then the people like you and I that have woken up, they're like, well, either you're woo-woo, it's wishful thinking, now we have this polite term where we're spiritual people. And I'm like, no, I'm just a person that's trying to face reality, And the thing is, it's really good. It's, because they'll say, oh, it's wishful thinking because you just don't want to admit that you're going to die, right? You don't want to admit that, there's no control in the universe. And it's like, no, it's not that I don't want to admit it. It's that I don't think that's what the evidence shows.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the word spiritual is they put it, I guess, is overused, and sometimes people use that as a code word to hide their ego to a degree, because I have interacted with people who are quotation marks spiritual, who've got some of the biggest egos and are some of the most narcissistic people that you could ever meet.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you. I guess we need to find another term or a realist, maybe?
No. I just always question language, and that's the language I use it too. We have to use language because that's what we've got. It's just, I am tired of conceding ground to the materialists. And when I talk to people, listen to this podcast I was just telling you about, we always have to prove to them. Well, show me in a triple blind study to P of, whatever, you got to show me that way that this is true for me to believe it. I'm not going to believe the 10 billion people who have had a near-death experience. I'm not going to believe the people who have had medium readings and spoken and know that they were, communicating with their loved one. I'm not going to believe the parent of the autistic child that says that I communicate with my child through dreams. And my child came to me in a dream, and told me this. I could just go on and on about this. So we've said, they've said, we're going to dismiss all of that. We're going to dismiss your experience because you can't show me in a lab. And I'm again, I just get really excited about this because I'm a chemical engineer. I've worked in a lab. I understand how science works. I understand how physics works. I'm not opposed to that. But what they've done is they've put the burden of proof on us to prove what we frankly already know. I mean, if you've ever talked to anybody who's had a near-death experience and you tell them, prove to me you've had a near-death experience, they're going to say, I don't care whether you believe me or not. I know what's real. I know what happened to me. I know this was realer than me sitting here talking to you. So I'm not interested in proving it to you.
You make a really good point because that's something similar to what I say, where because someone has asked me before, well, Todd, how do you know that some of the things you talk about are true or real? I said, well, the things that I talk about are things that I've read about, experienced, had done to me, or was taught. And one of the words I just used there was they had the experience. Mm-hmm. So because I've done a lot of psychedelics, I can tell you specifically about the experience I had. So I can tell you that when you travel, it's real. Mm-hmm. Like this voice talks to you. And it's happened to me so many times that I can tell you that the voice is real. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't prove to you, I can't give you a triple blind placebo test. I can't give you a book to read to prove to you that that was real. But I can tell you from my experience what I felt, what I saw, and what happened to me. Mm-hmm. So I know. And I think the thing now is this knowing, because this is what even Christ used to talk about now, is the knowing more so than the believing, because belief is just thinking that something is real without any actual evidence. But knowing means that you've ate it, you've drank it, it was done to you, you lived through it, right? So you had the experience, so you know it's real, right? Yeah. Like I've been through a Category 5 hurricane. I can tell you it was one of the most weirdest feelings I've ever had, to be in total lack of control and just have to sit down and just wait for it to pass, right? Mm-hmm. So no one can tell me what it's like to be in a Cat 5 hurricane, right?
Yeah, well, again, we've come to this mindset that again says we can only prove things, and it's interesting because if you talk to a true scientist, he'll tell you science doesn't prove anything. Science can disprove things, and science can say this is most likely, but science doesn't really prove things. But what they'll do is they'll challenge us, prove it to me. And I'm like, okay, well, I've had communications with my daughter. I've had many medium readings, and I've known they've told me things that they could not possibly know through any normal human method. I've had synchronicities happen in my life. I've had, miracles happen in my life. So I know these things, right? And I say to people, like, for example, I've never been to China. You can't prove to me that China exists. Now, I know people who have been there. I've seen pictures of it. I've gotten products from there, but I've never been to China. But I believe China exists, right? I think there's pretty good evidence, so what does it mean to know something, right? I have belief, or I know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow, just based upon what's happened for the last several billion years. I'm pretty sure the sun's we call it the sun rising. It doesn't really rise, the earth spins, but we call it sunrise. So I have a pretty good idea that when I leave this physical body, that I have a really, really good idea of what's going to happen. based upon a lot of evidence, a lot more evidence than I have to know that China exists or, other things that I don't understand how they work, right? I don't know how my car works. I don't know how the internet works, but I know it works. I couldn't explain it to you. But I Bluetooth, I don't know how that works, but I know that it works because I've seen evidence of it.
True, that is true. That is true. So, the message that seems to be pushed these days is that men should be more feminine and women should be more masculine. So, how do you think then that has affected the social dynamics between men and women today?
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because the masculine and feminine energies in the universe have to be in balance, and even within ourselves. So when people say that men should be more feminine, it doesn't mean that men should act like women. It means that men need to be more in touch with those feminine energies of creativity and cooperation, what we call feminine energies. And it's interesting. I don't hear a lot of people saying that women should be more masculine because a lot of women are really in touch with their masculine side. But we use those terms because they tend to be more prevalent in one gender, body gender than the other. I think that what we all need to work on is balance. I'm a very left brain, logical person. I told you when I was watching Star Trek, I wanted to be Spock. I'm like, I didn't like Kirk. I like Spock. I was that guy. And I'm married. I've been married for 34 years now. And I've had to learn, like, I need to be more in touch with my emotions. I need to be in touch with my wife's emotions. If I'm not in touch with her emotions, our marriage is not going to work. I could go and I could argue logically with her all day long, but if I don't connect with her emotionally, it's not going to work. So I think that's what people are saying when they say men need to be more feminine. We call it feminine, but it's just really being more balanced.
Yeah, I do agree that we need to be a bit more balanced. And I think what they've done, the message that is being given to the youth, is they've distorted that distinction to make it almost more literal.
Mm-hmm.
So we're having a lot of feminized men because I was I actually interviewed this lady and she said that her son said that at school now, I think he's like 15, the girls like more feminine men, boys. And I found that kind of strange. So I think now that the distinction where women, because I'll be honest with you, I think that women need to learn to be a little bit more logical, because if you only use feelings to be basing your decisions, it means then that you're not necessarily making the right decision, because feelings are fleeting and you should never really base your decisions on feelings. Now, I'm not saying that how you feel is irrelevant, but I think that you need to be able to have a bit of discernment, and discernment will only be able to come through using some level of logic. Because if you are only feelings, you are more likely to act and overreact in situations. But if you are able to say, okay, well, this is how I feel, and this is what I tell my clients that are girls. I said, okay, how you feel is relevant, but you have to ask yourself, is that actually the reality of the situation? Because how you're feeling does not always represent what is real, right? So you could feel a certain way, but it may just be feedback, or it may just that you are triggered from something that makes you feel uncomfortable. So then why are you feeling uncomfortable? Right? So it's this sort of like asking questions to be able to get to the lower level of to why you're feeling like that, because it is not all the time that the way you feel is actually what is really going on. And I think that there's a skill that women need to learn, just like we men need to learn how to be able to communicate emotions, be able to feel emotions, be able to connect, like you said, on an emotional level with your partner. So I think that both sexes have a little bit of work to be done, where men need to feel a little bit more and women need to use a little bit more of logic and reason in order to make decisions.
That comes back to that balance. And, one of the reasons I became an engineer is because I like to have the right answer to everything. I liked engineering because there are equations and I know precisely what the right answer is. And so I went through life thinking there's a right answer to everything. I can just use logic to figure everything out. And I was talking to this young man that is a friend of my daughter's. He's in his early 20s. He's an engineer. I'll never forget. He goes, when should I buy a house? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What do you mean? Do I have enough money to buy a house? I don't know. How much is maintenance? How much should I budget for maintenance? I'm like, I can't tell you. You might have a house. Your furnace could last for 5 years. It could last for 50 years. And how much is enough? There's no equation for that. Should I take this job or not? So yeah, we should use logic. We should think, okay, this job it's a long way away. I'm going to have a 2-hour commute. I'm going to make this much money. That's all really important. But what men tend to do, to take the other side of it, is we think we can work everything out through logic. And sometimes it's like, I just have to go with my gut. What's my gut telling me? And so it's both. It's saying my gut's telling me this. Does it make sense from a logical perspective? And again, that's where each of us, not just men and women, but each of us needs to balance those two things out. I was and still am, rely way too much on my logic. And I need to learn to work more on relying on my feelings in terms of and it is a feedback loop, between our thoughts and our feelings and that stuff. So I think as human beings, it says, in the Bible, it says God made man, male and female, like he is, or it's like, because God is both. I mean, that energy is the yin and the yang. And I think we all need to try to embody both of those things as opposed to saying, it's all about logic or it's all about feelings.
Yeah, I try to teach balance to my clients and, especially with my female clients, because sometimes let's be honest, right? Women tend to over rely on feelings and men tend to over rely on logic. So what I try to teach both is to have a bit of a balance between the two, because Carl Jung describes it as the amena in the masculine, which is the feminine, and the amenus, which is the masculine in the feminine. And I think that is pretty much how the universe works, because you have to have, like you rightly said before, from the darkness comes the light, right?
Yeah.
So we have to have both energies to coexist together to bring harmony. And I see where we are now is that we're having a distortion of that distinction, where it's become more literal, and then we have too much of an imbalance of masculine thinking, right? Where we need to have a bit more of a between the two, right? And I think that is also us men are responsible for leading that. I think that, some people may say, oh, what I'm going to say is misogynistic, but the way I see it is that men are the leaders. Men are the ones that need to actually take responsibility, because I think that you have strong men will create a good society, because what will happen is that women will follow, right? And it's not their job to go out there and dig the holes in the ground and build the business and buildings and create dikes and all that kind of stuff. That's our job. We do the hard work. But what has happened now is that men have sort of shirked their responsibility. So what's happened now, and this is a deep topic, because you can look at the history where they took the gold from the backing of the United States dollar, introduced drugs into the ghetto, put guns and weapons in their hands to create gangs. So it is a deep topic. But the long story short is that they took the men out of the society and the family, and then the women had to step up. And that created an imbalance in our society, because women learn the type of man that she would want to have from the interaction with her father. And the boys learn how to treat women from the way the father treats the mother. But if there are no men there, you create an imbalance. So then now you end up having all these distortions in in genders and women becoming more masculine and men becoming more feminine, and then again, there's no balance. So I think that the key here with this particular part we're talking about is to look for balance, because without the balance, there will be what we have now. You know what I mean?
Well, you're right. It's a deep topic, and I would say again, I think a lot of women would say, and I want to speak for them maybe for right now. You know, we have so much masculine energy in the world, and look where it's gotten us. You know, where we're destroying the planet. You know, wars. You know, all the division, all the tribalism. Because women do tend to be more cooperative. Women do tend to seek more, and then we're talking about again tendencies. And I don't think it's that men should not be men or women should not be women, but we should all figure out, okay, what's the proper balance here? What's the right balance here? Because we tend to, look at our society right now, we tend to see everything as an enemy. I mean, look at the guy we've got coming into the White House right now. He's already attacking all of our allies, verbally speaking. So there's one thing I will say, I absolutely agree with you 100% is we need a balance in energies. And that's within ourselves, that's within our societies, across the board. And so we need to each look at it and say, you know, like I said, for myself, I know for me, I have way too much logical stuff going on, and that doesn't serve me all the time. It serves me well when I'm working on an engineering problem. It doesn't serve me well when I'm working on a relationship.
Yeah, this is true. And for guys out there, if you're trying to use any logic to communicate to your girlfriend or wife or partner, forget about it. It will not work, right?
It does not work. That's one thing I can tell you for sure. And every man I know that's been married for more than 5 minutes knows that.
Yeah, it is a very, very big challenge that we may have. And what I would like to say is that I think that if women understood men a little bit more, I think we can get a little bit of help in that department, because men have to understand women to a degree in order to get them as a mate, right? This is an absolute fact, because you have something called courtship. Yeah. So you have to understand women to a degree. But what it is now is that women are not necessarily taught about men and what they actually want, what they actually like, their tendencies, because we have to go and approach girls as a man. So from trial and error of several fails, you have to realize, well, okay, well, that didn't work. This doesn't work. Okay, this works. Okay, we're going to try this and that. So we have to understand women to some degree. But I think one of the challenges we have is that women don't really know what men actually want and what men actually like, you know? And I think that if women were to ask questions to men, like, candidly, what do you really like? But the thing is that men are afraid to tell women the truth, because men, I can keep it 100 here. Men just want to have sex with women. So men will tell women lies just to have sex. So what it is now is that men are afraid to lose the woman, so they don't tell her the truth. But the thing is now is that the problem is that women are not able to receive the truth in a way without getting triggered and thinking that is personal or an attack. So I think that both sexes have work to do. And I think that if women really value their relationships and they really want to make it work in a relationship, they need to start to understand how men think, what men like, and how men are to a degree. And I think that we would be able to get that balance, because I think that not having discussions like this, where we're like having thought provocation, that girls will not understand necessarily what the boys want, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's interesting because I think, okay, is this a biological difference that men and women have, or is it sociological? And a lot of it is sociological. A lot of it's the way boys are raised. We're taught boys don't cry. Boys don't feel sadness. Boys don't whatever. And so what happens to a lot of men, we suppress our emotions to the point where we don't even know we're having emotions. And you could talk to a guy and say, what's going on with you? And he might be sad, but all he feels is anger because that's all he's ever been able to feel because he's never been taught it's okay to be sad. So we've got to help men with the language of what it is you're feeling. We've got to help men learn to turn within so they can express what it is they feel. Because you're right. It's like, it's okay to say I want sex and it's okay to say I'm hungry. Other than that, I'm good. And that's the way a lot of guys are. It's like, I don't show weakness. Guys don't show that.
But what's the funny thing about what you said just now, showing weakness? Most girls punish men for showing weakness. This is one of the reasons, sadly, why men don't show weakness. Because I have watched so many interviews with girls, and it doesn't matter the age, from 18 to say like 50. And most of these girls, and while most is not all, please hear most or a lot of. So it's not all, because women tend to, when you say something, they think, well, I'm not like that. But if you're the anomaly, great. But a lot of women punish men severely for showing weakness. Now, I do think that men shouldn't be going out there necessarily be crying all the time for anything that happens to them. But obviously, if your father died, or even like a pet, then you have an excuse to actually maybe be very down, and because it's a loss, right? But I think that you have to be very careful who you be vulnerable with as a man. I think that one of the problems we have is that we're not choosing the right women to actually be vulnerable with. Because I think with the right girl, there can be an element of vulnerability, but there has to be an element where not necessarily crying, but you can actually express, well, I'm actually kind of sad right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And be okay to say that. And then women have to say, okay, well, you know what, this guy is actually a bit sad, not punish us. Because the thing is that I'm realizing is that if you show any vulnerability now with especially modern women, you get punished. They think that you're weak. So
I can't speak to that. I've been out of the dating game for almost 40 years. So I don't know. And if that's the case, it's really sad, because to be in a working relationship, you have to be able to be vulnerable. Otherwise, it will work for a while, but it won't last. You've got to be able to be yourself. You've got to be able to be real. And so if you're with the woman who's punishing you for being who you are, then you need to find someone else, is what I would say.
Yeah, because what has happened now is that, because I'm still in the dating game, and I can tell you for a fact that what I just said is literally how it happens.
Yeah.
And is mad, because women today have all of these massive prerequisites for men. But what a lot of women don't understand is that the things that they want, most Western women, I should say, is only like a small percentage of men. Is about 1% of men. They want the 6'6", 6 feet, 6-pack, and 6 figures, right? So 1% of men in the West actually fit that category. And then again, even if he does has those things, what about his personality? Does he have the same values as you? A lot of these things are not taken into consideration by a lot of these modern girls, right? And so this is why I said earlier that I think that women need to do a little bit of work as well if they actually want to make it work, because we have this strange phenomenon in the planet now where we have the most single people ever. Right?
Yeah.
It is insane, right? We have 8 billion people on the planet, and it's something I can't remember the statistic, but it's mad where most people today are single.
Yeah, I'm hearing that, and that's a worldwide thing. I hear a lot of people in Japan are they're just giving up, just like, well, I'm not going to have a relationship. That's really sad. Again, this is way outside my area of expertise, because I've been out of the dating game for 40 years, so I have no idea what's going on.
Listen, you are absolutely lucky. I can tell you for a fact, if you were to even have to enter the dating game now, you will see that it has changed exponentially now.
Hmm.
It is, and the reason for that is social media. So what has happened is that the internet and the social media has inflated the ego of a lot of girls. So what has happened is that today girls have access and reach to top tier men.
Yeah.
So what has happened is
Yeah.
that a lot of girls who are maybe an average girl, and average is not ugly, average is just average, right?
Hmm.
She has messages on Instagram and Facebook or whatever app they use, but mostly is Instagram from top tier guys, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've
And
heard this. Yeah.
so what happens is that because these guys are top tier guys, the women think that, okay, this is the standard for all men.
Right.
So what has happened is that most men will just sleep with those girls and they wouldn't necessarily want an actual meaningful relationship. So what happens is that these men are sleeping with 90% of all the women. So the average guy or the good guy, he can't compete. So what's happening now is that the girls, although they have a lot of options, they're not really real options because those guys just only want to have sex and they don't want to have a relationship.
Yeah, I actually heard something about this, and they were saying that what happens is those guys, those top tier guys, their bad behavior is rewarded, so they don't ever get any better. So it's a real conundrum, right? It's a real problem, I guess. If people are like looking at dating, which a lot of people do, like everything else, it's a competition. You know, like we got this pool of people, and it's like so. Yeah, I'm really glad that I'm not in that. My daughter is 28. She has a boyfriend. It's a good guy. So it's not part of my life at all.
You're lucky, my friend, because I'm telling you, right? Like now, um, the life of a man for dating is extremely hard,
That's
extremely
fun.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of girls don't really understand how difficult it is to actually be a man, right? Because men have to have the confidence to go and approach them. Men have to have worked on themselves. Men have to have disposable income to be able to court them. They
Mm,
have to, be physically fit as well to be somewhat attractive.
yeah.
So when a man actually dates a woman, it is because he's had to put in a whole heap of work prior to meeting her.
Mm,
So women tend to only pick guys now at the end of the finishing line, where a man is at the finishing line where he's achieved certain things. But when a man is in his process and on his journey, most men get punished and they don't get the ability to even get a girl. No, sometimes you may get lucky where a woman is smart and says she sees the potential.
hmm.
But today, the way social media works, where it's instant gratification and women stunting on social media is to stunt against other girls, it affects the psychology of the younger girls.
Mm,
So we have a massive um, what should I say imbalance in
yeah.
terms of the social dynamics between men and women, you know?
Yeah. Wow.
But it's quite interesting, quite interesting. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you though, like, how familiar are you with like the Anuna gods, the Anunnaki, and the gods of Mesopotamia, the ancient world?
Not at all, really.
Okay, because yeah, that's interesting because I think that those gods or beings are really the ones that are running the whole show,
Hmm.
and I think that with the drones and the plasmas that we're seeing now is a bit of a harbinger of what is to come because I think that what they're trying to do is to instill massive amounts of fear. And as you rightly said before, fear is a very powerful tool to control humanity.
Hmm.
And this is why you see most religions have a savior and they're all ruled by fear.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see either a fake alien invasion, a real alien invasion, or a combination of both. And I think that what they're doing now is that they're seeding our consciousness with that fact that we're not alone. Because mean, the Pentagon admitted that aliens are real and no one even batted the eye against it.
Yeah, that was wild. Yeah. After what, 50, 60, 70 years of denying it, they're just like, yeah, it's real. People are like, okay, well, what's the stock market doing?
Yeah. So, we have a very interesting situation on Earth now. So, do you have any, so how do you specifically help people find their purpose in life?
Well, it's different for every person because every person comes in with a different situation, a different issue, different things they want to work on. It's generally speaking, I told you about the 4 things I have people do like on a regular basis. I help people like, what is it that you feel like is missing? What do you feel like your purpose is? If you have a purpose, are you dealing with, emotions like anger or like guilt? Because I find those hold people back a lot. So if they are, we'll deal with those things, right off the bat. And it's really sitting down with people and talking them through, like, how do we reframe? It's largely, we started off talking about this, right? Everything's a matter of mindset. Everything really is a matter of how do I look at it? I can't control what's happened to you. I can't control what's happening to you or what will happen to you, but I can help you control your mindset. How do I look at this? And by making that shift into what can I do? What are practical things I can do? What are thoughts I can hold? I can help people to get out of that deep, dark funk that people usually come to me in.
Okay, excellent. And so, do you have like any mantras or slogans that you say to yourself to help lift you up when life knocks you down with an uppercut?
I don't have any particular ones. There was one I did practice for a while. It was it was every day and every way I'm getting better and better and better. And I thought that was really nice because it is memorable, it's simple, and it could be applied to literally everything in your life. So I've heard if you say that like 100 times a day for 100 days, it'll really shift your mindset. I don't do particular mantras. I do gratitude practice, on a daily basis. So that's the big thing. It's like really training myself to look for what's right as opposed to looking for what's wrong. Looking for what's wrong it's the human condition. It's the way that we're built biologically. It's evolutionary. It makes sense because if you're running from lions, you're not going to be looking at flowers. You're going to be running from the lion. So it's not that there's anything wrong with us because we're so negative, but our brains were evolved to keep us alive, not to make us happy. So really for me, it's a matter of like, again, what is going right in my life? What's, there are things that I don't like. There are things that could be better, but there's always 10 times more things going right in your life than there are going wrong.
Yeah, this is true. And I find that I don't know why, but for some reason we've been conditioned to look at the things that either we don't like or the things that we don't have to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it is a societal thing, a human thing, or the propaganda that we've been fed through like movies and stuff. But
I think it's both. I think
it's a strange phenomenon, isn't it?
It's a natural phenomenon to look for what's wrong. As I mentioned earlier, it's an evolutionary thing, but also it's a big part of capitalism to keep us greedy and hungry. So always, what's the next thing? You've got the latest iPhone, you've got the 15, but now the 16's out. You've got 18 pairs of shoes, but you really need 20 pairs of shoes. So that's what keeps society, that's what keeps our capitalistic society moving, is people always wanting more. So there is programming. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you just turn on the television, you can see we're literally being programmed to always want more. So it's both. So it's a matter of, again, understanding, first of all, where it's coming from. Part of it is internal. Part of it is that programming, and then turning it off, and saying, okay, like, I have a nice car. I bought my car like 4 years ago. And I love my car, but I still get emails every day. we'd like to have your car back. You should trade your car in. And the new ones, the 2024s are so much better than the 2020s. So it's both things, right? I'm like, oh, I deserve a new car, and they're telling me I should get a new car, and but when I get in my car, I make a conscious effort to go, this is a really nice car. I enjoy driving it. I'm going to enjoy driving it. I don't need another one right now.
Yeah, it's mad, because I find like you have to make a conscientious effort
Mm-hmm.
to actually say, well, no, I don't actually need this thing. This is something that I want. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with wanting something, but I think that, I think this is where what you said in the beginning, gratitude. I think gratitude goes a long way into like combating that, because if you're grateful for what you actually have, you don't necessarily need to go and get a new car or a new phone if the one that you have serves you well,
Yeah. We very rarely look at something and go, oh, that's working really well. Oh, that's working
Yeah.
right. My refrigerator, I take it for granted. My refrigerator, when it's running, okay, it's running. That's what it's supposed to do. But when it breaks, that's all I can think about is that my refrigerator is broken, right? And it's funny, what I try to do is like something happened in my refrigerator, a little while ago. It was having this issue. I'm thinking I'm going to buy another refrigerator. It's $2,000, blah, blah, blah. And I called the repairman. He came out as a really simple fix, cost me $100. And that was for the service call. And so most of the time we just go on and go, okay, great. My refrigerator is back to where it was. Instead, I said, I just saved $2,000. This is great. I thought I was going to spend $2,000. That's $2,000 I didn't have to spend. So I flipped it around and said, this is something good that happened to me.
Yes, I agree. And I think that we need to start to look at things in a different way, to be able to combat that feeling or that thinking and that belief,
Mm-hmm.
where I think it's more like lack, But I think if people were to start to practice gratitude more, and then even just have gratitude for even having a refrigerator that works,
Mm-hmm.
having food in their fridge, having roof over their head, they can pay for their light bill, their water bill. I think it would go a long, long way in combating that sort of like compulsion to want to, upgrade to the new thing, or you feel there's a bit of lack in you because you don't have the new thing,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Again, most of us, and I can say probably almost everyone listening to this, we have more than we need. When you think about what you need, I mean, if you have clean water, you have food, and you have shelter, you have more than a lot of people in this world do. And if you go back historically, a lot more than most people had. We live better than kings did. You think of the biggest king ever, 500 years ago, didn't have the luxuries that we have in our homes. Air conditioning, microwave, stuff like that. And that's, again, we keep coming back to that gratitude practice. But it's like, don't take for granted what you have, and most of us don't think about it till we don't have it. Our health, when we get sick, and this is really weird because I was a sickly kid. I had migraines all the time. And there was no better feeling than that moment when your migraine went away. You felt so grateful that your head wasn't hurting. But for most people, it's like, if your head's not hurting, you just think, oh, this is a normal condition. But when you've had a headache that's had you down all day and made you nauseous and it goes away, you're grateful to not have a headache. And that's just part of being human. So this is why it's something we can literally practice anytime, anywhere. We can just say, I'm grateful that I'm sitting in a warm office with lights. And like you said, I can afford to pay the bill. When things break, I heard someone say, I had a flat tire. And I was all upset because I had a flat tire. But then when I was, getting it fixed at the dealership, they found out my other tire was about to blow too. So I was lucky that one didn't blow. And they're like, and I have the money to pay for this. So even that experience of something that's, quote, negative, we can turn into a positive.
Yeah, I think that is the way that we need to start to think as a species and as humanity, because I think is we just need a shift in perception. And I like what you had in your book, buried. No, it was, what is it? Buried, not burdened.
Planet not buried.
Right, planted, not buried. Planted,
Yeah.
not buried. And I thought that was a very, very interesting, part of the title of the book, because it really gives you it creates the possibility that you can turn all negative, quotation marks, negative situations into something positive, something for growth, something for healing, and basically even grief, like we spoke about earlier in this conversation.
Yeah.
So, Brian, it has been absolutely fantastic talking to you today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. We talked about so many different things. And so, can you please tell the people a little bit about services you offer, courses, coaching, where they can find you, and, like what you specialize in terms of grief and stuff like that?
Sure. You can find me at 𝒑𝒓𝒊𝒆𝒅. It's 𝒑𝒓_toothgrowth.com. You can find all my services and stuff there. I have an online community, so it's 𝒑𝒓_toothgrowth.com/community. So it's about 400 people now that we talk about stuff like this. We talk about spirituality. It's free to join. I just started a Substack. So you can find all that stuff there at my website. I do work with people one-on-one. People, I also have a podcast, YouTube channel, same name. Talk about similar stuff that you and I have been talking about today. So love to have you join me in any of those ways. And then if you want to work together one-on-one, I'm there for that too.
Awesome. And yes, people, go and give Brian your support and tell him that the Conscious Man 7 sent you, because we need to start supporting the people out there that are trying their best to actually help, putting their necks on the line, because I know Brian can concur what we do isn't very easy, and we need the support of our people in the community to keep us going, because we do this because we want to help and because we love it. And just a little bit of a support, like, subscribe, share to his channel, would do a world for him.
Yeah.
And as you know, guys, I'm an online fitness trainer. I help spiritually inclined people burn fat and build muscle. So if you would like to get into the best shape of your life, and you know that this is the season of gluttony, so basically you most likely would have put on another 5 kilos. So with January coming and all the New Year's resolutions, let's use that energy to actually not just make it a New Year's resolution, but a New Year lifestyle, right? So if you'd like to get into the best shape of your life but don't know how, you can hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246, or my name, 𝒕 𝒊𝒆𝒅, and send me a message and let's see if we're a good fit and I can help you. And as you know, people, I help people to connect with magic mushrooms, because magic mushrooms can help you to pierce the veil of reality, heal fears and traumas, connect to your higher self, and get some understanding. So if you're a little bit stuck in your spiritual journey, you're now starting a spiritual journey, and you would like some help understanding some of the things that we've even spoken about today, with going on the inside, etc., also hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246, or my name, 𝒕 𝒊𝒆𝒅. And as you know, we have the Conscious Man 7 podcast. And if you would like to support this podcast, you can always visit our merch store on Amazon, 𝒕 𝒊𝒐𝒕. And I have on one of those designs. This is the 𝒕 𝒊𝒐𝒕 shirt today that I have on. So if you would like to support this podcast and you like the work we do, head over there to get your merch. All the links to Brian's stuff, and also to my merch store and stuff like that, will be in the description of this podcast. And also, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share, because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. And Brian, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I could talk to you for hours, to be honest, but I need to be fair with your time. And we said 2 hours, and we can make it that. And so, I just want to say thanks for coming on to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. And people, stay tuned, because we have some more great and interesting guests like Brian coming soon. Speak to you soon. This episode should air just after Christmas. So I'll wish you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous 2025. Speak to you later, folks. Cheers and namaste.